What's up guys, I'm randomfrankp, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of my favorite tech gadgets of the month that you can buy right now. If you see anything you like, I'll have it all listed for you in the description down below, so you can check it out. And we will kick it off with this little guy. This is not an SSD, it's not a power bank or an external hard drive. This is a PC. This is the Codis Edge 2 Pro, a palm-sized computer that packs a pretty hefty punch that I'm admittedly not taking advantage of nearly enough given the power it's capable of. This is like a Raspberry Pi on steroids and looks a million times better too. In terms of construction, your power and reset buttons are on the side, and the back I/O is pretty simple with two USB-A's, two USB-C's, and an HDMI for output. It's all just super sleek looking and compact, and they sell these magnetic modules that attach underneath if you spotted the pogo pins. But really, I am blown away at how tiny this is, and given the specs of this Pro model, it gives you a lot of flexibility with how you want to use this or where. It's literally smaller than my wallet, smaller than an external hard drive, and it's not going to add any clutter to your desktop. Hell, you could even mount this somewhere, like behind your monitor. Feels kind of silly to admit, but I use this in my upstairs office as an emulator. When you power it on for the first time, you can pick and download your OS from Android to Ubuntu and Linux. I have Android 12 running on mine, and just like that, within minutes, it's downloaded, your OS is up and running, letting you now do whatever you want. And like I said, I've been, looking for a tiny all-in-one emulator for a while now, which is why I picked this up. So I have this loaded with apps from the Google Play Store like Aether SX2, Dolphin, PPSSPP, and so on. And yes, that's the name. Don't make it a big deal, I said PP. And since it has, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, I can download and manage all the games wirelessly, hook up peripherals, and play some of my throwback favorites. Things like Tony Hawk's Underground on the PCSX2, can emulate that through Aether, which I have before the last update, thankfully. Hit up some Pokemon Coliseum on Dolphin emulator, and play some games that I either just loved growing up, or never got to experience. You can also use this to stream games, like through GeForce Now, for example, or Xbox Cloud Gaming. And again, for the specs this has, it handled mostly everything I booted up. Some games are just bad ports in general, and yeah, every now and then some textures or backgrounds wouldn't pop in until late, but I think I can say that my search for that all-in-one portable emulator ends here. Now, like I said, I fully admit that my use for this is way underutilizing the potential. Like, this is capable of playing some modern games, rendering for development or media production, and again, with Ubuntu and Linux, you can really unlock more potential that I highly suggest doing. I did, however, download some benchmarking apps just to give you guys an idea of its raw performance with things like 3D Mark for its gaming capabilities. I also have some Geekbench and PC Mark scores just to give you a better idea of the productivity and rendering end of things. So as you guys can see, this performs pretty damn well. Next up, something that I've had for over a year now, and I've been using it on and off, and man, has it been an interesting journey. From Work Louder, this is the Creator Board. As you can see, this is anything but your ordinary traditional keyboard that you're probably used to. This is a 40% ortho board with modular attachments up on top and on the left side with a loop pad and a nano pad, they call it, giving you a bunch of extra buttons, macros, and dials to use. Now, this isn't meant to be a gaming keyboard, really. This is pretty much created solely for creators, hence the name. And you guys know me and my love for macro pads and gadgets alike. This really combines all of that into one product on your desk, which is what really got me hooked from the first time I saw it. So the main board itself is 40%, so your main characters plus the built-in dial. We then have the loop pad up top, which is 9 keys and 3 dials, and then the nano pad, which is 2 keys and 1 dial. All that combined gives you 236 programmable keys across the 4 layers you can access at any time with the various functions. Having all these macros essentially attached to a keyboard like this has never looked so good, and at the same time, it's nearly identical to the footprint of a 60%, so they managed all this without taking up much space on your desktop. It's also low profile. Underneath the keycaps are Kale Chalk Dark Yellow switches, which are linear at 70 grams, a bit on the heavy side maybe versus what you may be used to, but since they're low profile, the travel distance is only 1.3 millimeters to actuate. They're not hot swapped, so they are soldered into the PCB, and it has RGB shining through the shell of the keyboard enough to illuminate the characters of each key, as well as the frosted acrylic base of the keyboard underneath for some extra glow. Now, for me personally, my biggest struggle was pretty much trying to force myself to adapt to the ortho layout, which initially had me in this whole love-hate relationship going on. But that was my mistake. It wasn't until I really looked at this solely as a giant macro pad, which is when my usage for this really increased, instead of, trying to force myself to type on it like my main keyboard. I use this strictly for photo and video editing and have shortcuts for each key. Things like dedicated multimedia keys, keys for jogging my timeline during editing, not only horizontal scrolling, but vertically as well if I actually have to dial in. This has also been great for color correcting as well with the precise steps of the dials. It's definitely been interesting trying to adapt and change up my workflow, but once I really got used to it, all the functions and capabilities sort of just made sense. Now, like I said, it's really been a love-hate relationship from the beginning, but once you take the time to really learn it to get the most of its potential, you won't regret it. For software, it's compatible with VIA and QMK, so that's how you reassign all the buttons, functions, macros, dials, and all that stuff. And QMK, VIA, they're both great. I just wish maybe they had their own proprietary software, honestly, which would just make everything less tedious in a way and more visually friendly, because you do have to go through each of the modules separately, as you can see. It's not just one keyboard laid out in front of you, so if you want to reassign something on the Nano Pad or the Loop Pad, for example, you have to do it on that module tab individually. It's not like a deal breaker or anything, but you'll just be spending a lot of time in VIA really getting to know your layout. I'll just put it that way. And then lastly, it ain't cheap. This is around $400 for this keyboard, and they have the ability to, add on modules or take off ones, like if you don't need the Nano Pad. I believe they make a numpad for the right side that you can buy as well, which will be more money, obviously. But yeah, that's still pretty expensive. But related but unrelated to this, they recently announced and kickstarted a brand new keyboard called the Nomad. I backed it within like the first minute, legit, and it looks incredible. It's like what Apple only dreams they could have made for a keyboard. So I'll drop the info for Work Louder and everything they're doing down below, obviously. So next up is honestly one of my favorite pieces of tech that I've come across in a long time. Simply because there's not a lot of things out there like this that does so much for multiple use cases as well. This is the FiiO R7. Technically, it's an amp DAC, but this is an amp DAC for literally anything and then some. This is not limited to just your desktop, and as you can see, it's got a touchscreen display for the interface that's internally running Android as well. Yeah, this is wild, and I could sit here for like an hour talking about this, but we'll keep it to my main takeaways. So like I said, not just for your desktop. Built in are 8 different mode selections, things like Android, AirPlay, Bluetooth receiving, coax, USB DAC, and so on. But when you first boot it up, you have full Android OS with Android 10. That means your amp DAC can do things like run Chrome, browse YouTube, download games even, because you have full access to the Google Play Store. But that also lets it be a dedicated music player with music apps like Tidal or Spotify, use FiiO's own music ecosystem like Rune. You can place this anywhere and have your own dedicated amp DAC for countless sources. No PC needed. Built into the front are 3 outputs, with a 1/4-inch jack, a 4.4mm balance out, and a balanced 4-pin XLR out. Then on the back side, I'll just put up a graphic because it's loaded with a bunch more outputs and options. But yeah, hopefully you're starting to see how just unleashed this thing really is. Inside, it's powered by a Snapdragon 660 and a pair of the THX AAA 788 Plus amplifiers, so go with the internal ES906 8AS DAC. And for those who don't know what I just said, just know it's pretty respected hardware. So right now, when you want to listen to music, what do? You either go on your laptop or your PC, or you'll boot up an app on your phone, right? Well, this lets you ditch all of that and still have a dedicated all-in-one device to play to anything, like your favorite pair of speakers, for example. I've had this hooked up in my studio to my Vanuatu Transparent One Encores, and using the built-in storage, I can play all of my personal files or albums that I've had, including lossless WAV or FLAC files at 32-bit 384 kHz. So while I have access to all the streaming apps, sure, you can load this up with a memory card in the back and be completely offline with your library, again, all without needing your laptop or phone to play music. But let's be real, the majority of the time, this was back in my main setup. Like I mentioned before, this has a USB DAC mode, so when connected to a PC with the USB-C cable or to a laptop, you can now have this act as a full desktop amp DAC. So I can kick back and use this for music, gaming, to really push this. Now, in terms of tonality and how it sounds, again, since it's based off that THX 788 Plus, I'd say it's a very, very clean sound with a nice bump in the bass, But given all the power it has, I really felt that overall it was pretty neutral in the sense that it lets your headphones shine and allows them to be pushed to their full potential, which if you have a pretty powerful and hungry pair of cans that you haven't been able to push in the past, this will do the trick. It's capable of 3.6 watts output for headphones at 300 ohms. And by the way, your typical pair of headphones is just 32 ohms. So yeah, up to 300 here. And that let me experiment and try new headphones that I ordinarily wouldn't be able to run with my previous gear. Like I just picked up these Meze 109 Pros. These are a gorgeous pair of walnut open back headphones that have 50mm drivers inside, but they run at only 40 ohms. But with the balanced 4.4mm cable that I have, I can finally take advantage of that since we have the numerous different outputs on the R7. Also, my recent go-tos with the Sennheiser HD660 S2s, these are 300 ohms with the balanced 4-pin XLR. And again, I can finally use this gear properly since my previous amp and DAC only had a 1/4-inch jack. Now I can get the most out of them. So that's a lot to digest, right? And truthfully, I'm only just scratching the surface here with this video. However, there are 2 cons that I want to bring up that did bum me out. The first one might be silly to a lot of you, but it's something that I wanted to bring up. First up, when you're over the USB DAC mode, it just makes the device and interface look boring. Like this is all there is to stare at. And given it's powered by Android, when you're not in the Android mode, you don't have the option to really customize much visually. Things like wallpapers, adding widgets, none of that's now available to the USB DAC mode in the display settings, which are all things you can do when you're not in USB mode. I just wish there was more. The only customization you have with the USB DAC mode is the screensaver, which kicks in after a certain period of time being idle. In the global display settings, it's just 4 different clocks with different styles. But again, I just want more visual customization. But more importantly, my biggest gripe is the lack of a global EQ setting, which I can only assume that they'll add with an update over time because it just makes sense. Now what I'm showing you here is, again, through Android, you have access to download any of your preferred EQ apps in the Google Play Store. And that works great. You have the option to fully EQ your music or your apps. But that's only, again, in the Android setting. There are no global audio settings in the menu that allows you to EQ the entire device regardless of what mode you're in. I just feel that should automatically be a thing built into something like this. Again, you have the touchscreen, the dials, it has the tech, it has the power. It just only makes sense to be able to EQ the entire F7, and hopefully with an update, they'll add that. Just only makes sense. This is also $700, which at first, sure, might have a little sticker shock, but you look at the amp DAC market with what this can do, I think that price is more than fair. Honestly, they could have charged double. Hate to say it, but it's true. Then lastly today, bit of a curveball. That's something I typically show off. From Atoll. This is a rotating lens collar. Very interesting. So I picked up one for my Sony FX3. They're available for like Canon and Nikon as well. But the difference is between this and a traditional lens collar are that this is actually attached to your camera, not mounted onto the lens. And that lets you do things like rotate your entire camera while keeping it stabilized and the sensor on the same axis. So let me show you an example of how I would artificially sort of do this in the past. This is a 16:9 1080p window with an example clip. When you would start to rotate that in post, what happens is on the edges of the screen, you start to have a blank space that's not being filled due to the artificial rotation. So to combat that, I would shoot 4K in a 1080p workspace. So this is the shot at 1080p, then zoomed in 100% at 4K, I can now achieve the rotating effect a bit easier since the resolution is larger than our timeline, but it still looks fake. And plus, since we're shooting at 16:9 still, we're still going to eventually run into the same problem of having a blank space at the corners as we start to rotate it too much. Now, using this to physically rotate my shot gives me more flexibility in getting creative, but also I can slow it down by shooting in 60 or 120 FPS, so the final shot looks buttery smooth and just adds that extra motion instead of a boring static shot. Again, it's not even really the intended purpose of this, but that's how I like to use it. Well, I say that because I assume this was made for content creators who want to shoot now in the vertical orientation for Instagram, TikTok, Shorts, that kind of thing. So while my FX3 has 1/4-inch threads on both the left and right side for vertically mounting for a tripod, it's just so much easier to use this, and then whenever I want to adjust it, it takes 2 seconds instead of having to remount the entire camera. This Definitely a pretty cool gadget. Like I said, they make them for Sony, Nikon, Canon. It's listed by like S, D, N with their sort of listing and stuff down below. Comes in silver, black. A pretty cool, innovative product that I've been loving and figured I'd show it off today since this video is my favorite tech of the month. So guys, that'll wrap it up for this video. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you found some pretty cool tech gadgets that you didn't know you wanted or needed. Like I said, I'll drop them all for you in the description down below. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up to show your support. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at randomfrankp. And lastly, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Hope you all enjoyed. Have a good day.